Right. Good morning, everybody. We were doing the turns, and by doing that, we'll also be reviewing the Mamar. So I think the last thing we did yesterday was number 14. That's on page 43 in the booklet, number 14. Number 15 is Pashtus and Neshama Beguf. So the word Hispashtus is really a Hebrew word, and it has a few meanings to it, so it depends on what context it's used. But one of the meanings of this word is to spread out, to stretch out, to extend. So in this context, especially the way it's used in Chassidus, is Hispashtus and Neshama Beguf, how the Neshama spreads itself out or in the body. It means how the Neshama shines into the body, invests itself into the body. And this is the analogy that we draw between the way the Neshama spreads out its presence in the body, and Hashem does the same to the creation. Number 6, B'Telim, B'Emes, B'Mitzias. That's true. Very good. So B'Telim means it's bottle. B'Emes in a true way, B'Mitzias in a complete way. As we did the Mamar, I told you there was something missing here. And not only something, really, this is sort of the terminology that's used in the whole Mamar, and I missed out putting it into the terms. So maybe you can do it now. I'll write it on the board, and you'll fill it in. And even though you have it in number 15, you have it in number 17, but it's not the way it's, just the phrase the way it's used. I'd say more often, more common. These are the two terms. Both are bittul. One is bittul, beis yud, tes, vav, lamed.
Rabbi Mitzvosecha?
Yes.
We can't see the board. If you wrote a little bit more to the left, then we'd be able to see it.
You expect to see the board from Long Island?
Hoping to.
Now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay. Beis yud, tes, vav, lamed. Bittul ha-yesh. It's bittul ha-yesh. The other one is the same word, bittul, be-me-tzi-us. So bittul yesh means, no, I'm asking you, how would you, yeah?
It's when you're bittul, but you're still like very much in this like earthy world, and you're still anchored, and you're doing the best with what you have in comparison to the mitzvahs, where it's like complete and you're on a like a higher level.
Right. So bittul yesh means that you still have a sense of your own personal, separate, independent identity, but you submit yourself to a higher authority, which is Hashem. Bittul b'metzias means that I'm totally giving up that independence, that sense of independence, and I feel totally one with Hashem. We use the term giving up, but it's not really losing something. On the contrary, I'm becoming part of something higher and much greater than myself. I feel one with Hashem. So the simple example, if you'd have to give a simple example to someone or even to yourself, just to remember that, I would say the simplest of all the examples would be, there's one person that is drawn and attracted and excited about certain pleasurable things that are not godly or not even appropriate, but I'm in control and I don't let myself do that or go in that direction. That's bittul yesh. That means I do have other feelings and pleasures and desires that are not for Hashem, but I won't let that distract me. I won't let that make me deviate from following what Hashem wants. Bittul b'metzias means that person doesn't even have such desires. His only desire is to do what Hashem wants. There's no struggle. There's no battle. There's no challenge. But I've worked on myself to the point that I and Hashem are one, and that's the only desire I have. That's a sort of a simple, practical example of bittul b'metzias and bittul yesh. And then there are all sorts of levels. Like I said in class, that even if you would use the example of Shabbos and the 6 days a week, we would say that all of us on Shabbos are relatively bittul b'metzias because we're not even dealing with the worldly things. And on a weekday, Sunday through Friday, is bittul hayesh, where we were actually required to be involved in the physical world and deal with physical issues and challenges, and yet do it the right way. So that's an example of bittul b'metzias, bittul hayesh. So I guess number 16 is just a more elaborate expression. Bittul be'emes b'metzias. The bittul is true and complete. The other bittul is not so true. It's more practical. I won't follow my animal soul, but I do have an animal soul that has its own independent, separate interests in life. So now that's the same thing with number 17. 17 is yesh b'fnei atzmai. The word yesh is a sense of selfness, of self. B'fnei atzmai means separate. So actually, it's an acronym. So I should have spelled it out. Bifnei atzmai would be spelled Beis, Pei, Nun Yud, Bifnei, and the Ayin stands for Atzmai. Ayin Tzadik Mem Vav. The last word, Atzmo. Ayin Tzadik Mem Vav. In Hebrew, Bifnei Atzmai, these two words mean separate, on its own, meaning separate from whatever the context is. Number 18. This is used when we talk about the creation and we say that the creation was created me'ayin hamuchlet. We know what yesh me'ayin is. What does the word muchlet mean? So this would be translated as absolute nothingness. I guess there are certain things that we would refer to them as yesh me'ayin, but it's not really absolute nothing. There was something there before, just a very little something, And the change is so radical that it's as if it's coming out of nowhere. But in reality, it's coming from somewhere, like a seed that grows into a tree. So you look at this huge tree that's who knows how many yards high. And this tree has many branches and many leaves and many fruits. And then you point to a little seed and say, it came from this. So it's as if it's coming out of nowhere, because even the little seed, once it goes into the ground, it deteriorates in the ground and then it begins to grow. So it's as if it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. There was really something there. So in general, you can use the term yesh mi'ayin in a way that it's relative. But in this case, when we talk about the physical world coming from Hashem, it's ma'ayin ha'muchlat, it's absolute nothingness. There was nothing there, not a trace of anything of the physical that existed before. Okay, 19. I think that one someone has to offer, because you surely know the answer. We had it more than once. So help me out here. What?
Is it in the feminine?
Korale lakode lakaya?
Yeah.
It's Aramaic, that's why it's with an aleph. I'll translate the first two words and you'll translate the second two. They call him, Korale means they call him. What? God of God. Yeah, that's what it means. The Gemara says that the nations of the world believe in God, but they refer to him as the God of all gods. In other words, they believe that Hashem created certain forces in the physical world, certain forces in the spiritual realm, angels and other forces, and they were given the power by Hashem to do things independently. So even though they come from Hashem, and without Hashem they wouldn't be there, but once they were there, Hashem gave them power to operate independently. And that is really Avodah Zarah. That's not true. Emunah in Hashem. Number 20, Ha'ara Levad. First of all, what does the word Ha'ara mean? It's light. Is there a difference between Ha'ara and Ur? Ur means light and Ha'ara means light, but there's a difference. What? There are different kinds of lights. Something else. Ha'ara, that's true, but why? Has to do with the definition, the very definition of the word Ha'ara. Ha'ara doesn't only mean light, but it means a reflection of light. And by using that term, the implication is that it's like a completely, totally insignificant to its source. Let's think of ourselves. When do we use the word reflection? You're standing in front of a mirror and you see a reflection of yourself. Now the reflection is very similar to, it resembles me and it looks exactly like me. It's making all the movements that I'm making, but you can't compare a reflection in a mirror to a real live person. That's how the light of Hashem is considered a reflection compared to its source, where it's coming from. So when we use the word Ur, we're just saying it's a godly light. When you use the term reflection, we're out to imply something that whatever it is that we're talking about is only a reflection of the higher source. That's how insignificant it is and how distant it is spiritually from where it's coming from. '21. If you have any questions on what I'm saying, whether it's for somebody local or from one of our students that are on the air, you can ask the question. Mechusrei Emunah. What does Emunah mean? Okay. What does Mechusar mean? The root of the word is the Hebrew word chaser. Anyone ever came across that word? Ches samach reish. Ches Samach Reish. It means missing or lacking. So in this context, it means lacking emunah. It could mean someone who has no emunah or someone is lacking their emunah, not the full emunah they have. What?
No, I'm joking. Like I'm thinking in the shidduch, it's like they talk about like chisaron.
Chisar, right? That's the word.
It's like
Yes.
a very good chisaron to have.
Okay. The word, if you ever hear people say, does this person have a chisaron? That's the same root word. Chisaron means something they're lacking. What? Yeah, any kind of a blemish or something that's missing, something that's lacking. It's interesting to note, and I don't know if you remember Tisha time, we spoke about it, that there's 4 things, that in reference to these 4 things, we use the word complete. One of them is Geula. In the davening, Geula Shlema means complete. One of them is healing. Hashem should send a refuah Shlema, complete. One of them is Emunah. Ani Mamin, I believe, B'emunah Shlema, with complete faith. It's also complete. What's the 4th thing? Geula, Emunah, refuah, and tshuva. Also have the term, we should do tshuva shlema, complete. So obviously in all these 4 things, it could mean that I can do tshuva, but not in a complete way. I can have a healing, but chas v'shalom, it's not complete. There could be geula, but it's not the complete, it's just part of the process. Like right now, we're in the process of geula, but it's not yet the complete geula. We don't have the Beis Hamikdash standing in Yerushalayim. And the same thing is with emunah. Mechusar emunah means lacking emunah. The reason why we spoke about it in Tishrei, because it's interesting that these 4 things are letters Aleph, Tov, Reish, Gimel. Aleph, Tov, Reish, Gimel. What does that spell? Aleph, Tov, Reish, Gimel. Esrog. Aleph is Emunah Shlema, Tov is Tshuva Shlema, Reish is Refuah Shlema, and Gimel is Geula Shlema. So these 4 things have to be Shlema. Number 22, which is also in the Maimon numerous times, Meichen de Katnus, Meichen de Gadlus. So first of all, what is the difference between Katan and Gadol? Small and big. What is Moach or Moichin? The brain, the intellect, right. So it means a higher level of perception, understanding, and a lower level of understanding. This is in reference to what the Maimon talks about. There's a higher way of understanding that Hashem and the world are one, and there's a lower way. So the higher way, we understand that with Meichen, that's called Meichen the Gadlus. And the lower way, which means we see the world as a separate, independent entity, but it's being led by a higher, stronger, more powerful force. That's the lower level of understanding. Number 23. What? The Reish, Refuah. Yeah. Number 23. Muhusay v'atzmusay yizbarich. Now, muhus v'atzmus is very common. You probably can hardly turn a page in a mimer or a sikh. It shouldn't have the word muhus v'atzmus. So what does it mean?
Essence.
The essence. Atzmus means the essence, almost the same word, essence, etzem. And muhus also means its essence. In fact, the word muhus comes from the Hebrew word mahu. What is it? Its essence. Number 24. Kaziv hashemesh b'shemesh. If I heard you correctly, you said something in something. No, you must have said something different. Sun? Right, Shemesh is the sun, and what's Ziv? Ziv. The rays of the sun. Okay, now let's get the whole thing. What does it mean? Kaziv Hashemesh b'Shemesh.
Rays of the sun in the sun.
The rays of the sun in the sun.
Oh, I remember that.
That's the mashal that he uses in the Mamar. And the mashal is found in Tanya in the first volume. The mashal is found in Shaykh Vamuna. And the reason why I put it there, because you might come across a Mamar somewhere or a Sikha. It won't explain, it'll just say it's like the rays of the sun in the sun. And we should understand that this is referring to this famous mashal. And that is that the rays of the sun shine for millions of miles. We even established here in class how many millions of miles it shines for. And the Alter Rebbe says if it shines for so many millions of miles, surely the light of the sun must exist in the sun itself. Yet in the sun itself, you won't find any light. Not because it doesn't exist, because it exists in a different way. It's part of the essence. It's not there as a separate entity. It's the potential. The potential doesn't exist inside as something separate. I don't know if this much will make it harder or easier, but let's think for a second of the brain, the intellect. Person who has intelligence has the potential to answer a question, to solve a problem, a mathematical question, a scientific question, or a Torah question. He has the potential in the brain. So does that mean that the question and the answer and all its details are already sitting in my brain? What? In other words, you're saying every single word that anybody in the universe ever brought out of their mouth that's intellectual is in the brain? That phrase, that quote, exactly the question and the answer? It can be. Because the potential of the brain is infinite. And these things are finite. So the potential is a potential that I could comprehend or perceive or understand any kind of concept, but the concept itself is not spelled out and formulated exactly the way it came out of my mouth or the way I'm thinking of it. The potential is there that I could formulate any kind of concept. To make it more physical muscle, if you have a bottle of ink and you dip the pen, as it was years ago, what do they call those pens? The fountain pen. You dip it into the ink and you write with it, and you make an aleph or a beis or a gimel. Doesn't mean that in the ink there's a teensy weensy aleph. And then you take that teensy aleph, you put it on paper. There's no aleph and there's no beis. There's potential. But in the ink itself, so the aleph and beis is not new. It was in the potential of the ink. But in the ink, there is no aleph and beis. It's part of the essence. Same with the brain. The brain has the potential to formulate any kind of concept imaginable in any field of wisdom, in all the fields of wisdom. So it's really infinite. It's almost like saying, not almost the same thing. How many forms and shape could a person make physically? On a piece of paper, how many forms and shapes? I mean, we only have 6 directions, but in these 6 directions, you can make infinite combinations. And the same thing intellectually, I can formulate intellectual concepts in infinite ways. So the potential is in the brain, but in the brain, you can't find 2 things. Like this is the brain and this is the potential. The potential is part of the brain. So the light that comes from the sun is in the sun. So now I don't know if I confused you more, or I made it more understood. We'll have to take a vote.
It's like in a Flintstone. If you look inside the Flintstone, you can't see the potential that it has to.
Right. In the Flintstone, you won't find a flame.
Right.
Not only you won't find a flame, you won't even find heat. You won't find anything. There's something there that's the potential for fire, but you won't find it. It's part of the rock itself.
It's like a cloud. Like you don't find the water inside the cloud. And if you're in the plane and it's going through clouds, and you're like,
You don't get wet.
or even just like you're not like, it's not cloud around you. It's
Right.
Just,
So the truth is, this is with any source. The mashal is the sun and the sunlight, but any source, in essence, whatever comes from the source existed in the source, but existed differently. It's part of the source. 25. In the Mamar, I didn't elaborate on it in the Mamar. Let me say a word about it now. He says that the Matzah is where Hashem gives us the knowledge how the world and He are one. So he said that really Hashem has this knowledge. Hashem, how does He perceive the world? He perceives the world the way it is in reality. That's one with Him. And when giving us Matzah, Hashem is in a sense transmitting to us His knowledge that He has. So this is another subject which is found in Tanya, also in the second volume, where the Alter Rebbe talks about the fact that the Rambam also talks about this, that the way Hashem knows the world is very different the way we know it. Otherwise, it would be a very big question here. Hashem is infinite. Infinite is not made up of parts. And infinite doesn't change, doesn't become bigger, smaller, or more. And how is it Hashem doesn't become more by every day knowing more things of what are happening in the world? It's a very deep philosophical question. And the answer is also very deep and philosophical. But the words, the words is what it says here, number 25. The way Hashem knows the world is He knows Himself, and by knowing Himself, He knows the world, because the world is part of Him. It's not like knowing something outside of myself that's being added to me, which means it's similar to a person that I know myself. It's not two things. Me, myself, and I, it's all one. I know me, doesn't add anything to me, that's me. So that's another philosophical thing, but what it means here is that the knowledge that Hashem has through knowing Himself, so He knows the universe, but He knows the universe as it's one with Him, that's what's transmitted to us. His knowledge is transmitted to us. There's a famous story with the Alter Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe once told the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, who later became the third Rebbe, that he wants to give him a gift, and the gift is vast knowledge of Torah that he doesn't have yet. You know the story. What did the Tzemach Tzedek say?
He said he'd rather work on it.
He'd rather work on it, right? So what would have it meant? It meant it would have been a miracle. That a miracle means that Alter Rebbe has the knowledge in his head, and miraculously he would transmit from his head into his head. Like I told you today, with computers, we see this very physical. You have one computer here, and you press a button, and you can transfer all the information from this device into another device. So think of it that way. And you find something like this in Gemara. I think Rashi says this in Chumash as well. Yet Yosef, when he was in jail, had to come meet Paro. And when he met Paro, he showed him that he knew all 70 languages. Who taught it to him? Gabriel, the Malach, the angel Gabriel. How many years did it take him to learn all 70 languages? That night, before he went out of jail. How could you teach somebody 70 languages in no time? And the answer is, it was a miraculous thing that he transmitted the knowledge into his brain. It became part of his brain. So this is the same idea, but on a higher level, that when we eat matzah, imagine Hashem is sharing with us or transmitting to us His knowledge the way He knows the world, and that gives us the ability to have the true emunah. Number 26. This is also found in Tanya, and it's found very often in Chassidus. Anyone know what number 26? 25? Yedeya es atzmai, Hashem knows Himself. And by knowing and by having this knowledge, Yedeya kol hanevroim, that's how He knows the entire creation. Which means when Hashem knows everything in creation, is not like knowing something outside of Himself, which He's taking in, but it's knowing, by knowing Himself, He knows everything else, because everything is an extension of Him. Koyach ma. What does that usually relate to? Anyone know? If you look at the 4 letters and you rearrange them, it'll spell the word chokhmah. Koyach is spelled Chav Ches, and Ma is Mem Hey. If you rearrange the letters, it's Chav Ches, Chav Mem Hey is Chokhmah. It says in Tanya, Chokhmah is as if it were 2 words, Koyach Ma, which means it's a potential. In other words, Chokhmah is something which, yes, it's part of the brain, but it's the brain in a more abstract way. It's more potential for the details of the logic. We always speak about this when we talk about the difference between Chokhmah and Bina. The Bina is the concept in all its details, structured and applied to so many different things. And Chokhmah is the core of the concept, the essence of the concept, the absolute sort of, or you can almost call it the nucleus of the whole concept, what the whole concept is based on. Usually that is something which is abstract because it's not related to anything specific. It's a basic, abstract, certain theory, let's say a scientific theory. And with that theory, you can go ahead and build airplanes and do other things, and that's where all the details come into play. In fact, everything in any wisdom, it's not just Yiddishkeit or Torah, any field of wisdom, whether it's math, whether it's science, whether it's medicine, there's so many details to everything, but a lot of the details are based on a certain basic idea. And the idea in itself is a basic principle of logic. And usually it's not limited to A, B, C, or D. It's a basic principle of logic, and I can apply it to all these details. So the basic principle of logic, which is the Chokhmah, is abstract. And that's what Koyach Ma means. It's just a potential. 27. Kule Kamei Kula Chashuv. Again, Aramaic. Kula means everything. Kamei, in the presence of Hashem. Kiloi Chashuv is like nothing, is considered like nothing. Kiloi means like nothing, and Chashuv means considered. So again, Kula Kamei, everything in the presence of Hashem is like nothing, which means the whole world is insignificant in the presence of Hashem. That's the concept of bittul. Number 28. What would it mean if you'd come across in a Maimon and it would say the word netzolim? It sounds like Atzilus, but it's not. Or is it? Anyone? Did you ever have it before? Somewhere? Someplace? So the answer is, it is related. Netzolim means creations that exist in the world of Atzilus. Like the spheres in Atzilus, or angels in Atzilus. That's what Netzolim means. Now the next few parts, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, I'm not going to go into it because this belongs to the part of the Maimon that we actually didn't learn, that we skipped because it's more Kabbalah. And as you see, I did put it here because I must have tried teaching it the first time and I realized that it's not a good idea. So that's why you still have the terms there, but one day we'll be able to do that. So we have a little bit more time. I want to go back to page 39. These are not terms, but these are, in fact, in every booklet that I give you, we have this. I don't always have the time to go over it. We have psukim, means a verse of Torah or a statement of our sages. And to look at it, what is the difference between the way it's understood literally and the way it's understood after learning the Mamar? So, for example, I'm not going to do everything here, but let's do number 2 on the page. Be'erev teichul matzahs. Literally, it means that at night, the first night of Pesach, you should eat matzahs. It's a commandment. And what does Chassidus say about what's the significance of eating matzah the first night? That's the night that you eat matzah, you get the strength for Amunah. So we're not changing chas v'sholom anything literal from what it says in the Torah. We're just giving more insight. It's not just eating matzah as a commemoration, but Hashem is actually transmitting to us, He's injecting into us the power to have Amunah. Number 6, you remember this one. Hamispala, when a person davens, tzarich sheyitin einav lamata, his eye should be directed downwards and his heart should be directed upwards. You must know this because you have to daven today. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with your heart, with your eyes?
Your eyes, you look into the speaker.
Right?
And your heart.
That's the literal meaning, simple meaning. Right. Right. The deeper meaning is that your heart is directed upwards, which means you're thinking of how Hashem and the world are absolutely one and the world doesn't exist. But if you stick to that, after you finish davening, you won't be able to relate to the world that we live in. So therefore, you have to have your eyes directed downward, means in the time that I'm sort of on a high in terms of seeing only Hashem, I have to connect it to the physical world and how I will bring godliness into this physical world, which exists, and I need to function in that physical, technical world. And one more thing, let me try one more. Let's look at page 40, number 12. Or rather, number 11. Ma Shvi Rishus, just like the seventh day, it's not an obligation to eat matzah, it's optional. So too, the 6 days, it's only optional, but the first day, it's a obligation, it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment. What's the difference? What happens the first day, and what do we do the rest of the 6 days? So the first day is the day that Hashem injects into us the general power to have that amunah. And the 6 days is when we take that power and we allow it to be broken up into 6 paths to fix my chesed, my gvura, my teferes. In other words, the bittul should express itself in everything. I didn't explain it when we did the class, but to give a simple example of that, sometimes you find people that, especially when it comes to Pesach. Pesach, there are people that are very careful with Pesach, a crumb, a little thing. If anything goes wrong, they will do 132 somersaults to make sure that this is right and that's not a speck of chametz, and take every chumrah, everything in halacha that's a little bit more strict, they'll take it on. But when it comes to being sensitive to another person's feeling, they're not there. They're not home. On the contrary, they might even do the exact opposite. If you're so frumy, you're so God-fearing, how could you do that to the other person? What's happening is, does this mean that the good that they do is worthless, that it's not true? Not necessarily. But it means that we all have feelings of inspiration, fear of Hashem, or even love for Hashem, but not always does it express itself in everything. By some people, and it's probably related to our nature, our personality, some things are easier and some things are harder. So by some people, they have the bittul, but the bittul expresses itself in the way they relate to other people, but not the way they relate to Hashem. By some people, the bittul expresses itself the way they relate to Shabbos and kashrus, but it doesn't express itself when they relate to other people. and even with other people in this area, not in that area. So when we say that we have the Amunah and then we have the 6 days, we want this to penetrate my Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Hod Yesod, meaning it should penetrate and have an impact on every aspect of my neshama and all my parts of my personality. That's what it means practically. We're going to learn a Mamar after Pesach called Hichotzu, very powerful Mamar. And he talks about that sometimes people are very critical of others. And when they see them do something wrong, they come to the conclusion that all the good they're doing is worthless. They're really a fake. They're lying. It's not true. Sometimes people, what they do good is sincere, and they get all the credit for what they're doing, because over there they don't have such a big challenge. And in a different area, they have a bigger challenge. That's the Yetzer Hara. So we do need this Amunah to penetrate all three. Okay, we'll stop here. And to be continued tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem.
Morning.
So I'm coming today, so I'm coming tomorrow night.
You're coming tomorrow night. Oh, nice. Okay, Hashem. Hashem. Okay. Miriam, are you here? Sorry, Miriam is here.
Who?
Miriam.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Maya. Chava is here. That's a hard one. Sarah. Sarah. Sarah Poole here. I'm sorry. She's absent. Okay. Karen. Estabila is not here, is she? Good coming. Ariella is here. Leah is here. No. Hanabin is not here. Is Hanabin on Zoom? Yes.
We've got 2 people on Zoom.
I'm here.
Okay, got you. Esther is here. Esther Makogan. And Nati.
She's on Zoom.
Nati's on Zoom.
Yeah.
And Toam. Lily. No. And then Bella, and then Deborah. Rahul Khan. Okay, I'm not sure about the rest. Okay, let's begin. So you can take out your Sfarim. Learning the halachos of gvina, of cheese. I'm going to finish these halachos, Mr. Shev, very soon. We're going to start from page Vav, which is page 86, halacha gimel. The main reason that we're concerned about cheese is the fact that there are kevas nevelo, that the starter culture to create the coagulation of the milk into cheese, the starter could come from an animal that's an nevelo, that's not a shechted animal, so it could be not kosher. And that's why the Chachamim said that to make kosher hard cheese, you need to have a mashkiach, from a person who's religious, keeps kosher present to make sure that the starter, that the culture is a kosher culture. Now, Yesh min harishonim, some rishonim say, she'atiru gvinas nachem ki b'mkem esayim lahoya nachem abidim barkevas barkeva. In their place, where they lived, in their locale, they did not use arkeva. They didn't use the stomach lining of a stomach. Therefore, there's no reason to make the gvina not kosher. Most rishonim maintain that gvinas akum was something that was prohibited with the consensus of the Sanhedrin, page 86, Pevav. Even those that say that by milk it wasn't like that, by cheese they agree that it was established with the minion of Sanhedrin, so therefore it takes on the full strength of law. Even if the reason why the rabbis instituted and enacted this particular law no longer is applicable, another Bezdin does not have the power to annul their words. Unless it's greater than the first one. Therefore, the custom is to prohibit gvinas akum even in a place where they don't use animal rennet, which is really today in America, it's animal rennet, it's not that common. And we shouldn't be paid together, which means we shouldn't break open a boundary and permit it. So the custom is to make that all inclusive, and it's prohibited if there's no Jew present by the actual making of the hard cheese, which is why, by the way, on the marketplace you'll find a lot of soft cheeses are certified kosher. No, I'm talking about for the non-Chol Yisrael market. You'll find a lot of brands of soft cheeses that are certified kosher, but you'll find very few hard cheeses that are certified kosher for the non-Chol Yisrael market, because to make kosher hard cheese is expensive. You have to have a mashgiach on premises all the time, putting in the rennet, and it's a full salary. And often they're running a few shifts a day, maybe even 3 shifts a day. So you have 2 or 3 people working there full time. It's a very expensive thing. There are some companies that do it, but it's very expensive. Now, halacha dal imra Yehudi chalivas abehemas vasias agvina v'rosh le'nita v'secha shum dvar iser. If the Jew watched the milking, or in this case, the Jew watched the actual cheese making process and saw that no forbidden material was put in, the Ramah, his opinion in the Shulchan Aruch, Moshe Israelis holds that if a Jew just merely watches the non-Jew put in the rennet, that is sufficient to make it Gvinas Yisrael. Even though the Jew was not actually physically involved in the making of the cheese, but because the Jew was able to witness it and ensure and ascertain and verify that there was only kosher ingredients going into the cheese, that is enough to qualify as Gvinas Yisrael. The Shach, who's one of the commentaries in the Shulchan Aruch, he's stricter. He says that in order to make it Gvinas Yisrael, the Jew has to actually put the rennet in. And in practical terms, what we do when we give Hechshedim is very interesting. I want to share this tidbit of information with you. When we certify cheese factories that make hard cheese, the mashgichim live on premises, on Shabbos and Yom Tov also. They have a trailer very often right outside the building. Now on Shabbos and Yom Tov, they cannot put the rennet inside the cheese. It's an Isra Boina, because it's an act of building, right? If you put rennet into milk, it's going to coagulate and turn solid. It's an act of building. So you cannot do that on Shabbos. So on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the mashgiach just merely witnesses and watches the cheese being made, making sure that the ingredients are kosher. But during the week, we try to be machmer like the shach, and the mashgiach would put the rennet in itself. In addition, we also have another hiddur. We have the Jewish people buy the rennet, because according to the Noda B'Yehuda, this Isser is only if the rennet is owned by a non-Jew. If the Jew owns the rennet, then it's also easier. So that's another thing that we do just as an extra backup protection. Okay, halacha he yeshi tiru gvinas anochri gamim leiro Yehudi chalivas abehemas. There are those that say that even if a Jew didn't watch the actual milking, when if these following 2 stipulations are in place. If we know when the non-Jew did the milking, their intention was to use it for cheese. Therefore, certainly they did not mix in chalav tamei, because non-kosher milk was not curd. And the Jews stood there at the time of the making of the cheese. And they saw that no Isser went in it. Therefore, there's nothing to be concerned about. But the drinking of the milk itself is not allowed. This is only mutter b'diavad. Only in the case of hefsem meruba. The divrei hamatir cholav nachri b'medina yiseinu, according to those that are permitting, not meaning Rav Moshe Feinstein, who says that cholav nachri in our country is allowed. Commission is brought by Chamishi. Ashagam ledvar of royal val nefesh machmir, even though Rav Moshe himself says that val nefesh should be machmir. That this cheese, when a Jew was there at the time of making, even a Baal Nefesh does not have to be machmir. It's enough to do hashgacha from the time of the making of the cheese itself. However, whoever doesn't rely upon the heter of Moshe Feinstein regarding milk in today's countries, is because we're concerned about most of the opinions that say it's aser. You should not have Gvinas Yisrael that's not from Chol Yisrael. Let me just explain. I'm going to take a step for a moment. Step back. We're on page Ches for those girls that just came in. Page 88, Halacha Ches. We're saying that when it comes to making hard cheese, there's two steps. You have to first have milk, then you have to take the milk and turn it into cheese. Chol Yisrael cheese means that you're taking Chol Yisrael milk and you make it into Gvinas Yisrael cheese. Now, for cheese to be kosher, it has to be Gvinas Yisrael. There's no heter from Reb Moshe to have cheese that was not from non-Chol Yisrael milk that was made Gvinas Akum. There's no heter for Gvinas Akum. So for hard cheese to be kosher, according to all opinions, you have to have a Jew present when they make the hard cheese. Reb Moshe Feinstein was leaning with regards to the milk itself. But those of us, Hasidim included, that don't rely on the heter of Reb Moshe, for us to have cheese, we have to have cheese that's made from Chol Yisrael milk turned into Gvinas Yisrael cheese, where a Jew is present when they actually make the hard cheese. That makes sense? The starting raw material has to be Chol Yisrael milk. Right? Otherwise, we maintain that milk is not kosher. We don't allow it. The Moshe was matir it, but we don't allow it. Some people are lenient, even though we Chassidim are not, that you have cheese that's from the time of the making the cheese. That's when they start the supervision. They don't start the supervision from the time of the milking. They make sure that the Jew puts in the rennet. It's like the Jew made it. Some gamal heter haniskar l'maylo. They're relying on the heter from before. It's also considered a difficult case. That those that can't afford to pay a higher price. For more than what the milk is worth, when the cheese is worth. The time of the milking. These heterim are not very, very clear. Someone wants to be lenient, they have to ask the rabbi. If according to their situation, they should be lenient in this regard. That's all talking about hard cheese, non-spreadable cheeses. Soft cheeses are different because they can cure it on their own. A soft cheese will turn into cheese by itself. They often put in vinegar just to help expedite the process. Make sense? For those of you that have made cheese before. They'll put in vinegar to expedite the process. Let's say you're making ricotta cheese or something like that. They pour in vinegar, it makes it go much faster, but it can cure it on its own. By the way, that's just parenthetically speaking, since we're getting close to Pesach, cheese needs to be certified kosher Pesach because a soft cheese could have vinegar in it, which could be chametz. Be aware of that. Gvina raza, soft cheese is the Yeshle stopping in Gvina raza, which is like cottage cheese or ricotta cheese or what have you. Whether these types of cheeses are also included in the prohibition of Gvinas akum. And the Jew has to be there at the time of the making. Maybe they're not part of Gvinas akum. Maybe a Jew does not have to be present when they're being made. This is all talking about someone who's lenient with regards to butter. Someone who's lenient with regards, stringent regarding butter. We shouldn't be lenient. So we're stringent even with regards to butter. Remember we said earlier that butter has a lenient factor, a lenient feature to it, because in order to turn it to butter, it has to come from kosher milk. So if you see butter, it's a sign, oh, it's coming from kosher milk. But there's an opinion that's stringent that says, oh, we're still concerned. Maybe the non-Jew mixed in some non-kosher milk into this milk, and there's some little pockets in the butter that have non-kosher milk mixed in that didn't solidify. Okay, that covers the subject of cheese. Any questions from the audience? No? Okay, that's fine.
Does it usually say on a package like 6-hour cheese versus?
That's a good question. It should say so. A certifying hechsher, that's certifying a hard cheese or cheese that's an aged cheese, should say aged 6 months or more, and then you'll know it's a 6-hour cheese. They may not say 6-hour cheese, they might just say aged 6 months or more. If it's aged deliberately, then it's a 6-hour cheese. Like Ha'olam has like a Parmesan sprinkled cheese that's aged 10 months, I think, or something like that, and the like. That's also a discussion, by the way, because we're machmir to say that if you have a hard cheese, we wait 6 hours after eating a hard cheese before having fleishiks. So, for example, if you're serving a supper, or a better example, you're serving a lunch, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're serving a salad that has Parmesan cheese in it, you have to tell your audience that this salad is a 6-hour cheese in it. You know, it has so just be careful. If they're going to have supper 4 hours later, they have to be careful that the supper should not be fleishiks. They have to be careful. Then the question becomes, is a hard cheese that's aged always a 6-hour cheese? Generally speaking, the answer is yes, but there is an opinion that says that if you take a hard cheese that's a 6-hour cheese, an aged cheese that is, and you bake it or cook it, like for example, you buy a pizza that has a mixture of Parmesan and other cheeses, or you buy, let's say you make eggplant Parmesan, which has Parmesan cheese in it, mixed with a bunch of other ingredients. The Yad Yehuda, who was one of the Rishonim, one of the Achreinim, in the times of the Prima Godim, he maintains that that's a leniency because it's already, the charifas goes away through the baking process, the sharpness of the food goes away through the baking process, and therefore it would no longer be a 6-hour cheese. There's no official minhag Chabad in this regard. Hasidim are trying to be machmer and not rely on this leniency, but I'm just mentioning it does exist. For those that want to, so when we certify things in restaurants, we will ensure that the restaurant menu would say 6-hour cheese. And then everyone can do according to whatever their posik, their Masorah is, according to what their, whichever opinion they follow. Okay, now we're going to introduce a new subject matter. We're going to start studying about Tvilas Kelim, about toveling dishes. I'm going to tell you a story before we start. A story about toveling dishes. This is a story I heard this story from Rabbi Vichnin. Rabbi Vichnin was the Rosh Yeshiva in Morristown, in the yeshiva, the boys' yeshiva in Morristown, in Tiferes Bachurim. And he passed away about 27 years ago. He was a great man. He was one of my mentors. Unfortunately, he passed away at a young age of 54. A great man. It was funny, a genius, and has a heart of gold. The Shamash Avanali, his name is Rav Chaim David Nota. I don't remember his father's name. So Shamash Avanali, great man. Anyway, so he told me this story. I think this is a story from one of the Rishonim. I don't remember who it was. I think it was the Smak. That's what it comes to memory. I'm not positive. He went to tovel his dishes in the ocean before Pesach, new dishes, Pesach Kelim. And he comes to tovel his dishes. He's with his Talmidim, he's the teacher, he's the master, and he's with his students. And he immerses his vessels in the ocean. And a wave comes and sweeps away his dishes. All his vessels right before Pesach. And he's happy. He's delighted. He's beaming with joy. A year later, he comes again to immerse his vessels for Pesach, his new vessels, to immerse them in the mikveh. And he successfully immerses them in the mikveh, in the ocean, that is. And then the ocean sweeps up his old dishes from last year. A wave comes and sweeps his old dishes up. And incredible timing and the luck, the mazel that he had, and he walks away feeling sad. So his students, they use the classical line you have in Torah. Rebbe, Torah hi v'limen ani tzorich. Rebbe, my teacher, my master, this is Torah. Tell me what's going on over here. Please explain to us, elucidate this matter to us. We're bewildered. So he said, what don't you understand? He said, last year, when I went to table my dishes for Pesach, Erev Pesach, in the ocean, and then at that moment, a wave comes and sweeps them away, I knew that my mazel could not get any worse. It's like a perfect storm. And then next year, and that's why I walked away feeling happy, because I knew better times are coming. And then the next year, he says, I'm coming, I'm tabling my dishes, and it works out well. And then I have the mazel of getting back last year's old dishes, new dishes, but that suddenly get swept up in front of me. I said, my mazel couldn't get any better. I realized that things are not going to be as rosy, so I felt sad. So this is a good lesson. When we're going through a tough time, we have to be happy, because the Frierdiker Rebbe said, when you're at the bottom of the wheel, whichever way you turn is up. Remember this in life. When you're at the bottom of the wheel, whichever way you turn is up. So when we're like in the dumps, we all go through moments where you feel like we're in the dumps. We're going to go up, and better times are ahead. So we have what to look forward to, etc. Now I'm going to tell you a funny story about a mikveh. There was then we'll start studying. You better make sure you stop me after this, because sometimes I continue on. There's a division to Rebbe. He's one of the Chassidic Rebbes. He has a minhag that if a bacher doesn't come to yeshiva, doesn't come to Seder, affect him noch, meaning he inquires about the bacher. So this yeshiva, this Rebbe has a whole yeshiva there, and he's davening with all the boys, and he sees that one boy is missing, didn't come to davening. So he says to this gabbai, what's with the bacher? What's with this bacher? So they said this bacher is not feeling well. He's in bed. So the Rebbe says to his gabbai, after davening, we're going to make a bikur cholim. You know this story? You know the story? They told? Oh, you know it already. You all know it. Okay, fine. So you know that one with the mikvah. Okay, shine. It's good. I'll tell you another story about a mikvah then that you don't know. There was a tzaddik. His name was the Ribnitzer Rebbe. The Ribnitzer Rebbe lived until I think he passed away in like the late 1980s. No, actually, he passed away in the 90s. I'm sorry, the early 90s. He lived till like age 94, 95. He was a Baal Meifes. He was a moil in Russia. He did thousands of brisim, under the radar, illegally. And he was a mamash tzaddik. He was very close to Lubavitch, close to the Rebbe. Baal Ruach HaKodesh, mamish hafladik yid. He had very interesting customs. He used to daven at all hours of the day. And so I was once taking a flight, the year that I was saying Kaddish for my mother. That was 15 years ago. So my father's doctor told him that he should take a vacation, because it was a hard year. His father had passed away that year. My grandfather lived till 97. My father lost his father that year, and his wife, my mother. So the doctor said, take a vacation. So my father took my brother and I on a kosher cruise. So we're flying to Miami to pick up the cruise. So anyway, I'm flying on the plane. I'm sitting next to Mordechai ben David, the singer. Mordechai ben David was the shamish, was the helper of this particular tzaddik, the Ribnitzer Rebbe. So Mordechai ben David is telling me stories of the Ribnitzer Rebbe. Now, you know me, I love stories. I was milking him. I was sitting right next to him on a plane. That was great. It's like, he tells me the following three stories. First one's about a mikvah. I'll tell you the first one. He says the Ribnitzer used to toivel every day in Russia. And when there's no mikvah, he used to toivel, he used to break the ice. The Chassidim used to do this. They used to break the ice. First of all, going into a freezing cold river itself, you get hypothermia, is incredible in and of itself. But then there's the danger when you come up. If you break the ice, you have to make sure you come up through the hole, because if your head hits the ice, you can't get up. Your person could drown. So they used to hold. What they would do is they would hold the hand of a friend and go in. You know what I mean? And then that hand of a friend would also toivel in the water, and that's how they would make sure they get back up. The Ribnitzer went under, and one time he got stuck under there for a very long time, way beyond the amount of time a person could live, and he came out fine. It was mamash supernatural. He tells me another story about the Derech Mitzvosecha Mitzvas. The Derech Mitzvosecha Mitzvas it's another story about the mikveh, and I experienced this story myself. I watched it happen. The Derech Mitzvosecha Mitzvas had a hakpada. He had a certain, hakpada means a certain kind of stringency. He would only shake hands with somebody, another person, if they went to mikveh that day. So if somebody, let's say a man goes, give him his hand, and he didn't toivel the mikveh, he wouldn't shake his hand. He would just like, he would acknowledge them and greet them. So when the Rebbe came to be Menachem Avol the Rebbe in 1988, Tov Shemem Ches, after the Rebbe was nifter, I was there as a bach. I was watching. I watched him come in. He came in like this. He was staring. His eyes were piercing. He had penetrating eyes, and he would look at every bach, and they knew he was a tzaddik. Give him shalom. So they give him shalom, but there was some bach that didn't toivel. So he'd go like this. He would look at somebody, see right through them if they toiveled in the mikveh that day. I saw it happen myself. And then Mordechai David told me a story. He says he was in Eretz Yisrael in Tel Aviv once at a chasana that the Rebbe was by, and the drummer there heard that the Rebbe had this hakpada that he won't shake hands with someone who went to mikveh. So the drummer had not toiveled, and he tried. So he figures to test out the Rebbe. So he gives him the hand, and the Rebbe doesn't shake his hand. So by the chuppah, the drummer didn't have to drum because that's not when he performs. So the drummer ran to the ocean and toiveled, and then came back, didn't tell anybody, and then again tried to shake the Rebbe's hand, and the Rebbe shook his hand. He tested it. And the third story I'm going to tell you is not a mikveh story. That's a fascinating in of itself. One time the Rebbe told Mordechai ben David, he says, "Kum lamagin zen dechayas." He wanted to go see the wild animals. In Kabbalah Isius, every animal represents a certain thing, like the celestial chariots in heaven. Pnei Hari. So he took Mordechai ben David drove. He was his shamash. He was like his helper. He drove him in his car to great adventures. And Mordechai ben David. So the Rebbe's are sitting in the back seat, and the Mordechai ben David is driving in the front. And in the 1980s or in the 70s, in those days, wild animals such as lions and tigers would run loose. You would not open your window. It was a real safari. Today they're in cages. It's like more of a mild safari. But in those days, I actually went through it once like that. It was a wild safari. So they're driving through, and there's lions driving through. And the Rebbe tells Mordechai ben David, stop the car. And there was a lion like standing out there. So he stops the car. And then the Rebbe opens the window of the car. Imagine the scene. It's a lion like 20 feet away. And the Rebbe is staring at the lion. He's being misboined b'pnei hari. Like the spiritual, and now there's a known thing that at tzaddik, that an animal can see things that a human cannot see. An animal they see the tzel maliki and the tzaddik. They see the godly image, and they would never harm a tzaddik. So even though we think of it, it's dangerous for a person to be exposed to a lion like that, for a tzaddik it's not dangerous. So the ranger came running because they opened the window. That's the story he told me. He was there when this happened. Anyhow, story about a mikveh. Pretty geschmack, huh? Okay, there's more stories about the Rebbe. See, I told you once I start. The Rebbe was once the Rebbe was married, I think 3 times. He outlived 3 wives. He didn't have any children of his own, any biological children. His 3rd wife had some children from her previous marriage, so he had like 2 stepchildren. I think 1 or 2. So one time his 3rd wife went to the Rebbe to get dollars. She said, "Come by the Rebbe to get dollars." And there was a certain yid that needed help with a certain thing. And the Rebbe said, and the Rebbe was helping him. Like a miracle, a certain bracha. So the Rebbe said to the Rebbe's Rebbetzin, "Zagai man, tell your husband, thank you for helping out in this inyan." So it's like in Ruach HaKodesh, the world of tzaddikim, they're communicating. Not like on the phone communicating, they're communicating in the world of thought. Yeah, anyway. So the Rebbe is buried near Monsey, and a lot of Chassidim go to his caver to daven by him. The Ribnitzer, yeah, R.I.B., Ribnitzer. His last name was Rabinowitz. A hafla dikiyit, mamash, an incredible person. Perek Shvi, 7th Perek, Hilchos Tevilas Kelim. Halacha Aleph. Kishem shehivdilonu Hashem yizborach l'ktushosei b'mezayneseinu. Just like the Rebishter, Melech Malchei Hamlochim, said to the Yidden, "You're an Am Kodesh," like it says in Rashi and Chumash. You have a special diet because I care about you. I want to make sure that you're well. It's going to be in congruence with your spiritual makeup. So too, Hashem said that our dishes that are used for food preparation have to be holy also. Hashem said we cannot have foods that are forbidden, that create a blemish in our soul. Hashem said we can only have foods that are befitting Anshe Kodesh, holy people that serve God. Commanded us that the vessels that we use to prepare the food, they need an elevated level of holiness. So Hashem is saying to us that the vessels that we use for food prep themselves have to be imbued with a certain degree and a certain element of holiness. It's a profound thought. I'm just going to hold the thought for 1 second. I want to digress for a moment. We see from Torah that there's a concept that we have the actual thing itself, which is the food we're consuming, but the dishes that we use to prepare the food is what you would call in Yiddish the arun, the external factors. The external factors that help you prepare the food. So the Torah is teaching us that also the external factors have to be imbued with a degree of holiness. When we create a holy environment in our home, for example, so we have what's going on in our thoughts, in our minds, in our bodies, our soul, but there's also the external trappings of the home should be in congruence with that holiness that we're trying to achieve. So we want to bring it on all levels. In a similar way, so the dishes that we use to prepare our food should also be imbued with the level of holiness. If a person buys a vessel that was owned by a non-Jew, since a non-Jew does not have a Jewish soul, therefore the vessel has to be toveled in a mikvah to give it the kedushas Am Yisrael, the holiness of the Jewish nation. Dugma, similar to an effect that happens of a ger hanichnas kedushas Yisrael idei tefillah b'mikvah. When a convert tevels in the mikvah, they are imbued with kedushas Yisrael, with the holiness of the Jewish nation. And then this is all derived, this is learned out from what it says in the Torah in Parsha of Klei Midyan. So far, so good? Now we're going to list 3 psukim. These psukim are discussing the loot that the Jewish people got from the war of Midyan. Let's look at it inside. Vayomer Elazar HaKoyin Elanshei HaTzava. Elazar the Koyin says to the men of the assembly, people of the assembly, Habarim LaMecham, that are coming from the war, Zeis Chukas HaTorah Asher Tzivas Hashem Es Moshe. This is the statute of the Torah that Hashem commanded Moshe. Aches Azov, the Torah is now going to list 6 types of metals: the gold, as HaKosef, the silver, as HaNechoishes, the copper, as HaBarzel, the iron, as HaBedil, the tin, as HaIfores, and the lead. Okay. Kol davar asher yavei ba'esh ta'aviru ba'esh. Anything that comes in direct contact with fire gets purged with fire, v'toher, and becomes pure. Ach b'meinida yischato. This is talking about a meinida, which is the mikvah water. We'll see what that refers to exactly. V'chol asher lo yavei ba'esh ta'aviru b'mayim. Whatever does not come into contact with direct fire gets purged with water. So first of all, these psukim are teaching us some basic principles. It's teaching us the like-to-like principle. Something that gets absorbed with fire gets purged with fire. Something that gets absorbed with boiling water gets purged with boiling water. Now, you can purge something that gets absorbed with boiling water with fire, because fire is a stronger effect than boiling water is. But you cannot purge something, generally speaking, that's absorbed with boiling water, that's absorbed with fire with boiling water, because it's not as strong. And what is the effect of boiling water versus the effect of fire? So Halacha explains, we're going to learn about this soon, that fire real fire. It burns the iser in its place. There's nothing left. If I heat up metal to a certain temperature till it gets red hot, there's nothing left. There's no absorption left. It's all burnt to the crisp. But Hagala, boiling water, immersing something in boiling water, does not burn anything in its place. It removes, it extracts the absorbed taste that's inside the vessel into the koshering water that we have. Okay? So it's a different kind of an effect, a different play. Halacha base. Klei midyan shalokhu b'nei Yisrael b'shlal milchames midyan. The Klei midyan, the vessel of midyan that the b'nei Yisrael took as the loot from the war of midyan, were unusable for the Jewish people for three reasons. First of all, non-kosher food was cooked in them. If you're now going to cook kosher food in them, the vessels are going to give off the tama iser, the forbidden taste, to the kosher food. You're going to have a problem of an absorption, a forbidden absorption. Now, tama sheni, the second reason is because the vessels were tame, were defiled because they came in contact with a dead body. It's going to defile the person and the food that's going to touch them. Hasiba shlish, the third reason is any vessel that's from a non-Jew that comes into a Jewish presence, a Jewish possession. Any vessel that was owned by a non-Jew that now has become owned by a Jew is not usable until it gets toiveled in a mikvah kshera. Any questions on what I said so far? And now we're going to take what I just said and we're going to plug it into the psukim. You'll see how this all fits into the psukim we learned, because the psukim are the base for where we know these halachas. These are the three things that I mentioned in this parsha. Anything that comes in contact with fire should be purged with fire. This is the koshering of the vessel from the taste of Issa that's absorbed in the vessel. It says in the pasuk v'toher, and it's going to become pure. Lamdu chachmeinu zechreinu levracha, the chacham learn out. Shemilvad ha'avara ba'esh, besides the fact that you're koshering something with fire, tzorach hakli oitar acheres. In other words, besides koshering a vessel, the vessel has to go through another purification process. Via tvila b'mayim, it's tiveling it in water, lachnisu l'kedushas Yisrael, to usher it into a kedushas Yisrael. Mashenema acharkach, that which it says afterwards, ach b'meinida yischato. Peshu explains the fipshuta. Shakli shenitma b'tumas mes, a vessel that's tummy with tumas mes, tzorach hazoya b'mei efer paraduma. You have to. It needs to be sprinkled with the water of paraduma. Shematzinu shamayim shenesav b'efer paradikru meinida. Kidei letare mitumas mes, to purify from tumas mes. Ulam Rabbi Seinu Darshu, the rabbis derive. Even in this, there's a hint in the idea of Tvilas Kelim, because it's talking about a mikvah there. That's the vessel, that's the measurement of the body of water, which is 40 sa, which is Mayim Shekol Gufa Ilbam, which is the amount of water that a person can immerse themselves in. That's the amount of water you need to toivel a vessel and make it kosher. If it's a mikvah. If it's a live stream, you can toivel a vessel even in a smaller amount of water if it's a live stream connected to an actual wellspring. Okay, it's a different halacha then. Now, interesting to note that even though the halachas of Tvilas Kelim are mentioned in conjunction and amongst the halachas about the loot from Midyan, still the halacha is that if you buy a brand new vessel, even a vessel that was not yet used for anything not kosher, right? But you buy a brand new vessel, let's say from a store that the owner was not Jewish, so you still have an achraya, you still have an obligation to toivel it, even though it did not have a forbidden absorption. After mitzvahs tfilas kelim nichtav b'parshas kachshoras kelim, because mitzvahs tfilas kelim on page Sadik Aleph, mitzvahs tfilas kelim ain't tluya bin kachshoras kelim. It's not dependent on koshering the vessels. Even new vessels that are purchased from a non-Jew that never use them, still they need tefillah from the Torah. Now, By the way, if you have a vessel that's not kosher and also needs to be toiveled, which one comes first? Thank you. First have to kosherize the vessel and then you toivel it. That's the proper order. I just heard a story. It's a funny story about toiveling. My nephew just got married on Monday night. Hashem. So he went with his sister, my niece, to toivel all the housewares, from his kala, the toiveling in the mikveh. And it took like an hour because there's a lot of stuff, whatever. It's a whole process. And there was another chassan that was also going to toivel his dishes. And he left a box of dishes. So my nephew says to him, take me like another 45 minutes. If you want, I can just watch your stuff. He says, okay, yeah, thank you. Just watch my stuff. I'll come back later. So my nephew didn't realize he ended up toiveling this guy's dishes also, because he gets all these boxes, toiveling, and he looks around, he says, everything is done. The guy came back, he says, I did it for you. Could be worse, right? But it's funny, it happens. Okay. Halacha hey. Now, by the way, interestingly enough, since there's the psukim that are teaching us this halacha, the source in the Torah for the mitzvah of Tvilas Kelim, according to some opinions, is rabbinic, is min Torah. It's from the Torah itself, because you have the pasuk there that serves as the base. Now we have an interesting principle that anything that's min Torah, a child does not have trust on it. We don't trust a child. We don't even trust a child for that. So now I ask you a question: can we send a child to the mikvah and say, "Here, go toivel these dishes"? And can the child say to me, "I did it"? Do we trust them? No, because it's something that's deoraisa. It's from the Torah, and something that's from the Torah, a child is not entrusted with. Now, if you have an adult going with the child, if the adult is watching the child can make the bracha and toivel the dishes, as long as they do it right, if the adult is watching them. But the child cannot have the capacity of taking full responsibility for such an act. When it comes to Chol of Yisrael, which is only the Rabbanan, their child could have full responsibility if they understand the difference between a kosher animal, non-kosher animal, and there's no DA cows, but there's a bunch of other details. But in principle, in theory, it could work. There are some poskim that say that the main mitzvah of Tvilas Kelim was only rabbinic, but the drasha shadashu aleh, and the drasha that they learn out, Eine elo asmachta is just an asmachta. Most poskim maintain that Tvilas Kelim is min Torah. It's min Torah. Now there's a myth. That's what you call mysticism. That you can use a vessel one time before toiveling it. It's not correct. A throwaway vessel, you don't have to toivel if you're just using it once. But a regular vessel, it's not throwaway, you have to toivel before using it. Also, you're not allowed to use a vessel even on a temporary basis before toiveling it. This is only rabbinic in nature. And the food does not become asur. That was if it was prepared in a vessel that wasn't toiveled. You're allowed to leave a vessel in a house even though it wasn't toiveled. We're not afraid that you're going to come to use it. I'll take a question in one more moment. I just want to say one more halacha. If you have a huge vessel, it's so big it cannot even fit into a mikvah. You cannot use it without toiveling it. I feel the bishul kvar b'kli mei apamim b'litvil. Even if someone did use it 100 times, so in such a case, if it cannot fit into a mikveh, you have to do something. Either you can sell it to a non-Jew or borrow it back from a non-Jew. You have to do something about it, but don't ignore the issue. Yes?
So say you get a drink that's kosher and it comes in a glass bottle.
Good question, yeah. I appreciate the question. The question is, can you drink? So you're buying let's say whatever it is, and you're buying a drink in a glass bottle and it's coming from do you have to toivel the glass? So the answer is that the glass bottle does not have chashivas of a glass bottle then, because it's like they're selling to you in a bag. It's a more convenient way of selling it to you. in theory, they would sell it to you as a throwaway thing. It's just that for convenience, they found that this is the most convenient way to sell it to you. But if you wanted to keep the glass bottle, and let's say you strip it off the label, and then you want to keep it, then you have to title it. I'm sorry? No, flowers are not necessary. It's not flowers are not clay suda. Only a vessel that you use in conjunction with food prep. So storage vessels would qualify as food prep. But something that's not food related does not need to. So that's why you don't have to table a hammer or a saw, because it's used for a workshop. It's not used for food. But on the other hand, chicken scissors should be tabled because it's used for food. Okay. Any other questions? Have a wonderful Shabbos. Gesund.
But he just like talking about
No one like, so quiet and like.
It's such a bad syndrome routine, like I feel it, like I start to feel detox, yeah, for and it's not gonna be complete detox. Like it's gonna be another person's food, so we'll just like